Let's get started by creating some test cases in our test folder. So this is also going to be unit test, and we want to have a new class. Let's call this repository test. And this should actually extend test case. So what we basically want to do here is have 3 or 4 test cases. One will be a test case that actually shows that we can pass data from the entity to the repository, and this data will be persisted in the database, and also to update this data, and also capturing how we're going to find and delete data from the database. So the first test case that we want here will be a test case that shows that we can actually insert record in database by creating a new instance of a specific entity and then passing that instance over to the repository. Okay, so let's say public function test, it can create record with entity. So the repository should be able to create a record when given an entity. Okay, so we continue with our own use case. Our use case will be a bug report. So let's say bug report is equal to a new bug report. So say new bug report. All right, so let's make this correct. And then here I'm going to say bug report. And then we want to set some attributes. So let's say we're going to set the report type should be equal to some string. We'll get back to this later actually. So but for now, let's just say we leave this as an empty string, and then we want to chain on, and then we want to say set link. The link is also optional. We want to put this as an empty string. Let's just put something here. Let's say type 2, and then let's say the link will be https://testing.link.com. Okay, so let's say we put an hyphen here, and then move this to a new line, and then we want to keep on chaining, and then we want to say set message. Okay, we may want to double check to see what are the feeds that are available to us. So we have the report type, we have the message, we have email, link, and the date that this was created. Okay, let's grab that, and then let's set the message. This is a dummy message, and then let's keep chaining. Next one will be the email of the person making the report. So we're going to say set email, then we're going to give a valid email address, email@test.com, and then we can say set created at. Okay, so ideally we will want to do this from within the entity. We don't want to set the created at from outside the entity. Okay, so we will do that from within the entity. Then let's double check report type, message, email, and link. So that will be 4 things. Okay, so we have the 4 things that we care about here. And then the next thing we want to do is to pass this to a repository. And so we're going to say bug report repository is equal to new bug report repository. So in some cases, we may also want to think if we want to pass in our query builder here as a dependency to this repository. The thing that this will help us to do is to help us to have the flexibility to have another kind of query builder. So if we want to use a query builder that doesn't really talk to the database, we can then just pass that in. So that would be one way that we work with this. If we want to go in that direction, but certainly it's a good way to go, because remember we also talk about dependency injection. So we may think of having the query builder instantiated, and then we can pass it to this repository, and then inside of this repository we want to be able to now do queries and perform all of the operations that we want to perform. So let's say we want to instantiate the query builder and then just pass it through to, let's get this, then come back here and then have our setup here. All right, so we have our query builder and then we begin a transaction. And then probably we want to grab the tear down too. Yeah, let's just grab this and bring it here. Okay, so we have a query builder. We can pass this query builder now to the entity repository. So we're going to say this query builder. All right, so this way we now have the flexibility to use, even if we want to mock, we can mock in PHPUnit. If we want to mock, we can then actually pass in a mock version of the query builder. In that case, we will not be really talking to the database, but we will just be able to test that we can perform these operations. All right, so we can now move ahead one step further and then come here to say bug reports, or we could say new bug report. So let's say new bug report. New bug report should be equal to bug report repository create. Okay, so I hope you're beginning to see how this ties together. And when we say create, we want to pass this the bug report. So this bug report now contains new data that we want to persist into the database. And once we pass it through to the create method in the repository, this gives us a new bug report. So what we now have here is a new bug report that has just been created and persisted to the database. So we can now begin to assert. So we can now say sef assert instance of. So we can say assert instance of. Then we're going to say bug report class. So remember, we don't have any of these classes yet, so we're going to be creating them. And then we can say new bug report. And then we can assert that the ID is not null. Remember here that we also are not setting the ID, but when a new record is created, there will be an auto increment ID that is being generated. So we're going to say assert not empty. Okay, assert that this is not null. That will be new bug report. And then we should be able to say get ID. Okay, so that will be the ID of the bug. And then we can do the other assertions for the rest of the things that we have here. Okay, so let's just add one more. So this will be asserting the same. So let's say assert same. Okay, so we want to say that the value that we have here is equal to get report type. Report type. Okay, so that's a bug, new bug report, get the report type. And then we want to do the same here and here. So this is going to be for the link. So we could say here get link. And remember, we don't have any of these things yet, but we're going to actually be creating them shortly. And then we can also assert for the message. Paste it here, then say get message. And that's it. So we can also do for the email. So let's just do that. So assert same. And we say get email. All right, so we are basically checking to see that whatever we get back as the new bug report actually satisfy all of these conditions that we have here. And then we can go on to write the next test. So this will be for updating. So we want to say public function test. It can update an entity or a given entity. So to update, we need to find the specific entity, and that will lead me to maybe moving this out so that we don't need to keep creating the repository in each of the tests. So let's move it out of here and move it right here. So we want to create the repository here, and also we want to have it as a property here. So let's say private repository. Okay. And then we'll come back later when we have the classes and put the right annotations. So we can then say this bug repository. Okay. And then we come down here. So the first thing we want to do here is to find. So we want to find the specific bug report that we want to update. So we can come here and say bug report is equal to this bug report repository find. So we want to find by ID. So let's say, okay, so in this case, we're also going to have an issue because we have the rollback going on. So essentially we need to create the report and then find it. So we need to be creating it here and looking for it. So, okay, let's just say here ID. We'll fix that later. So we find the report. The next thing that we do is to update the report. Okay, so let's come down here and then update the report. So let's say bug reports. We want to change the message. So let's say set message. Let's set the message to something new. Let's say this is from update method. And then let's say we also want to change the link. Okay, so set link. And then we can say HTTP. Let's say HTTP column or / new link.com/image.png. Okay, so these are the two things that we want to update. Okay, so let's leave it like this, and then we want to say updated report should be equal to this bug report repository, and then we want to call the update method. So let's say update and then pass it the report. Okay, so that will be the bug report. So when we update, this update method will return an object, which will be the bug report object that was just updated in the database. And then we can do all of the assertions that we did previously. Let's just grab all of these. And basically, we want to test for two things. Okay, so we test for the message and the link. Okay, so let's remove this, and also we need to delete that. Okay, so we want to ensure that the link is equal to this, is the same with this, and then we want to be sure that the message is also the same with this. Okay, so remember here we still need to insert a new, or actually create a new bug report. Okay, so we now need to quickly do something. So what we want to do is just move this creation to a different method such that this method would return the newly created bug report. Okay, so that's all that we have here. We want to move it to a new method and say give us a new bug report. So I could just cut it and say bug report or new bug report would be equal to this create bug report. Okay, and then we can actually come to create this method, this create bug report. So let's come here and say a private function create bug report, and then can actually paste this here, and then we're just going to return this. So what we return here should actually be of type bug report. So we're going to say bug report. We don't have this yet, but let's just say this is what we want in the end, such that once we call that method, we already have a new bug report, and then we can begin to do all the chainings that we want. Okay, so right here we can now say new bug report, get ID. Okay, so we create a new bug report. We find that bug report from the database. Okay, so we could skip the finding part, but it's just a way for us to also test this method. Okay, so we find it, and then we now begin to use the report. And then the last method that we have here, or the last test case that we need here, will be public function test. It can delete a given entity. Okay, so we want to test that we can delete a given entity. So probably want to do these two things right here, and then we want to now delete this. So we can say this bug report repository, we want to call the delete method, and then pass it the bug report. And then now we should be able to assert that the bug report is actually null. So when we find it, when we find the bug report by this ID, we should be able to assert that it's actually null. Okay, so we create it here. So probably let's just come here and bring the find down here. So let's say we want to remove the one that we just created, and then we can now attempt to find that same bug report that we just removed, and this should actually give us null. So we can say safe assert null. Okay, so this should return null if the bug report was not found. All right, so that's all the tests that we want to write for the repository class. So we're going to continue to just run this test, and it's going to fail. And then as usual, we're going to now begin to implement this one by one, and then get everything to green as quick as possible. So let's just run the test. So we want to just target that specific test. So we can say dash feeder, and then we can say repository. Let's see here and say repository class db query builder factory not found. Okay, this can be easily fixed. We don't need to move this to the next section. So let's import this. So I'll just import the query builder, and also I need to import this. Okay, so I have these two imported, and then let's run the test again. Should now get different set of errors here. So we can see that all our tests are failing, and now in the next lecture we'll begin to actually fix this.